greening of mobility, right? How do you start to think about mobility, transportation of people, of goods, of services throughout the world, and sort of understand what is that benefit, but also what is that opportunity. So thank you all for coming. We'll have some more people trickle in, but I think this would be a great time to introduce our wonderful guest here today. So my name is Mark Couder. I work for the City of Austin Office of Sustainability, and I focus most of my work on climate adaptation. How do we prepare our transportation systems, our sort of infrastructure, our utilities for an increase in heat, drought, flood, wildfire, locusts, a bunch of different things. But today we're going to talk about what is that relationship between the green mobility and the future of the world. So with that, I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask you to say what your name is, what your organization is, what does your organization do, and then how did you get from your house to here today? Like, what kind of mobility did you take? So, Mercedes?
Hi, good morning. My name is Mercedes Garcia. I am the head of global issues at the European Union delegation here in the United States, so normally based in Washington, D.C. Delighted to be here today and my first time in South by Southwest, so very excited about that too. So what my organization does, well, the European Union does many things, as you will see if you join our events during the week, but one thing we do is we have a vision for the future. We want to be carbon neutral. The entire continent, European Union wants to be carbon neutral by 2050. And our mobility is a huge part of that, of course. It's 25% of our carbon emissions, and we'll get more into that in a moment. So I'm here to talk also about the European Union Sustainable Mobility Strategy. And today I came in walking from the hotel.
Wow. So you live in D.C., right?
I live in D.C. So yesterday I flew in, of course, and I rented a car. I went to the hotel by car, and since I've been walking to the city.
I like the shoes.
Thank you.
Lionel?
You like my shoes?
I do.
Thank you.
So we all wear new shoes. It's good.
So my name is Lionel Baraban. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Famoco. So at Famoco, we digitalize transactions, and in particular mobile transaction. So we help mobile workers, public transportation, but also humanitarian sector, transition of refugees. We can talk about what's happening now in Ukraine. So we help all the logistics transaction of how you identify, how you pay, how you transfer, how you get in a bus. When I hear you, Mercedes, talking about all the different means of transportation you talk, that's called, multimodality of transportation. A multimodality of transportation, of course, you need to identify each one of those. So that's what we do. And we do that by providing mobile devices that are create a sovereign mobility. So that is not sending metadata back to anyone. That's what my organization do.
Excellent. And how did you get from your house to here?
Oh, sorry, by car, because I live in Houston.
Okay.
So it's not so far. I'm almost local.
Nice. Sam?
Cool, thanks. My name is Sam. I'm a co-founder at OTIF. OTIF is a Belgian-based startup, and we actually work on automating trains. So we develop assistance and autonomous systems for rail, because it's our vision that for a city or for a country or for any region to have a sustainable green transport mode and a green transport system, you need a solid backbone. And rail, in our vision, is that solid backbone. That's why we really work towards that modal shift away from cars towards rail as the city, as the backbone of the city. Then your next question was going to be, how did I get here?
From your house. From your house.
Sorry?
From your house to here.
So the house is in Belgium, which makes it probably makes me the winner of the competition. I'm not sure. So of course I took the train from my house to the airport, and I flew, unfortunately, through Chicago, then to Austin. and then I came here by Uber. I was looking for the backbone of transportation in Austin. Unfortunately, I didn't find a lot of rail solutions, so I had to take Uber.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi.
Hi.
How are you? So we are introducing ourselves. Name your organization, a little bit about your organization, and then how did you get from your house to here today?
Today?
Or just if your house to here.
Okay. So my name is Mariana Kühnel. I'm the responsible Secretary General within the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber for everything that relates to international trade, EU policy, and innovation and digitalization. So that's the reason why I'm here. And we are trying to help our companies to use the innovation potential for further growth and additional business models. And yeah, I flew in, but today I just walked from my hotel to here.
Nice. Great. So I hear this theme of walking, which is good, right? Which we've been doing for a while. So I'm going to start out with a series of questions, and then in about, 20 minutes, we can open it up to have questions from you all. So my first question is, who cares, right? When I ordered my shoes, I hit click, and they arrived, and I'm like, yes, I have shoes. But I didn't really care about like the environmental impact, the social impact, et cetera. Why should I or anybody else worry about green mobility? Why is it important? Who wants to take that?
Well, I think we should all care, because this is not about saving the planet, it's about saving ourselves. And for anyone who's read even the press release of the last IPCC report, especially the one page that's on North America, places like here in South Texas, you're going to be seeing a third of the days over a year over 100 degrees. And that's not the future we want for our children. That's just one of the many health effects, negative health externalities that climate change has. But also because it's a huge opportunity. It's the industrial revolution of our times. So we want to be able to be at the forefront of it and take advantage and be the front runners to then also hopefully be able to share that technology with the rest of the world. So I think that's why we think we should care.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think the caring is there's an ecological point of view, there's also a congestion point of view, a mobility point of view, which is a bit indirect, but if you imagine all the trucks driving around with your shoes or with the packages, if you think about all the cars that try to get into the city centers without a solid backbone, then that's what you get. And of course, it's an indirect effect. People that order shoes are not going to think about, okay, my truck, my package is going to cause me to be in traffic for 15 extra minutes tomorrow. People don't think about it, but that's really the impact that we see. And just to give you that real impact, if you look at a freight train, for example, a freight train typically takes 50 to 100 trucks out of off the road, which is a huge impact. If you talk about congested cities, if you talk about congested ports, and trying to get that logistics flowing. And same thing with urban solutions. So if you talk about Paris, for example, every day, if you look at the tram network, there's a metro network. Every day there's 1 million people that use the Paris network to get from where they live to where they have to work. And then on top of that, there's 4 million people that use the metro. So it's an enormous impact on congestion as well, which is of course slightly indirect, but I think that those two elements, the ecological and the mobility aspect, should be the reason why people need to care.
Exactly.
From the Austrian point of view, maybe it's a business decision. Besides we need to care as individuals, but for us, Austria is known for the clean environment because you love being in Austria for the clean environment, and so everything that is necessary to clean up the air, to reduce pollution, it's necessary from a business perspective, and I think research and development can then play a crucial role in the future of mobility.
Great. And for us, when you talk about green mobility, you need to define what means green exactly, and we all have this idea of green is not polluting, but what is pollution? We can talk about digital pollution, for example, and if you talk about digital pollution, each time you use a mobile device to identify your shoes and to identify to whom they belong and to identify where they go. You're not just doing that, you're creating a huge amount of data and a huge amount of metadata, which is here to profile you, why do you like those shoes and what are the next one you're gonna buy. And so all that pollution is also a huge pollution that requires electricity, requires cloud computing, requires a lot of things. So, and yet, in order to have mobility and to have a multimodal mobility, you need to be able to identify simply transactions. And if we talk again about your shoes, they were produced, they were tagged, they had a price, then they went into a truck, then you purchased them. And all that is completely digital today. So for me, if we talk about mobility and green mobility is a connected green mobility. And we cannot talk about connected green mobility if we don't start to think a little bit on what are the effects of digitalizing everything and how we make sure that that digitalization stays ethical or human. That's what we're trying to do.
I think that's a perfect segue to my next question, is the history of mobility, but also the history of technology. You have to ask, for who does it benefit? Who benefits from it? And what are those unintended consequences? Who is the loser in that conversation? Like, for example, this I-35 here in Austin, which is just next door. That was the big divide and still continues to be the divide between Black Americans, Hispanics, and white Americans. And it was built into our master plan in 1928. Technology has always been used to benefit people. How do we ensure that we include the people whose voices aren't traditionally in those discussions throughout this process so that it benefits everybody?
Well, if I continue on the same idea, let me give you a few ideas on that. We used to have that idea that we're gonna have free technology in the B2C world, because all the mobile devices, all this idea of mobility was invented 20 years ago about for the B2C world. And we had a business model invented perhaps in the Silicon Valley. It says, okay, against free lines of code, we will have the right to profile people. And that went from a mobile phone to Africa, where the first computing method is a mobile phone. 80% of internet connection in Africa are done through mobile phones. And today, Africa is becoming a digital colony. So whom does it really benefit? I mean, are there really the beneficial of the technology, or are they really becoming a colony? And if you think about what is a digital colony, a colony is, if I take the example of India, they could cultivate cotton, but they could not create fabrics out of the cotton. London was able to do that. England was able to do that. And now, with data, it's exactly the same. So now, in Africa, they create a huge amount of data, but that data does not belong to them. That data belongs to China or US. They are becoming digital colonies. Now, if you take a step back and you say, now, if you take the mobility and the cloud computing, you have all Europe, what we call open data projects in order to be able to take all the data created out of that digitalization and make sure that that data is globally beneficial. And those subject of how you create a green mobility and how you make sure that the data created out of that is of benefit for everyone, for me, is a key subject. And of course, the people that are not part of that game, they are the ones that are digitalized and they are becoming colonies. colonize.
I think in Europe we are very, very sensitive to this. And I remember a few years ago back in Belgium when they started digitalizing and introducing cards that could be used in different modes of transport, but of course they needed some data to be harvested for that process. And there was a lot of preoccupation among the citizenship about how that data were going to be used, where they were going to be stored, etc., which requires, I think, a sensitization beforehand. But of course, that's not the case here in the US or in many other parts of the world. So I think educating citizens to understand the power of data, but also the liabilities that come with it is very important. But to your question about how do we make sure that nobody's left behind in these processes, I think the consultation processes, for example, we have encouraged all cities in Europe to put together their mobility plans. And a very, very important part of how they put together that plan is consulting citizens, making sure that it's not only the best informed citizens that actually participate in consultation, and making sure that the needs of those traditionally less well-deserved communities are also consulted. So small things like making sure that there's a service bus that during the weekend allows people who live in the banlieue, which are not so rich, to come to the center and to enjoy the services that are only available in the city center are crucial. And if those services can be for free, even better. That's just what Dunkirk, for example, did some years ago, and it was very successful. It was so successful that they're now doing it also during the week. So.
Nice, great.
I think a crucial point on that is that it needs to be affordable, and on the other hand, you need to allow diversity. Diversity for me means why all money put into electricity, for example, in e-mobility? Why not in fostering as well synthetic fuels or hydrogen? Because from the technical and research point of view, this is not decided so far. And we have a really successful cluster in Austria and Styria where they are doing research in hydrogen and in synthetic fuel. And for me, the discussion about pollution, we should have an honest discussion about what do we mean with pollution.
Exactly.
Because not all electricity is green. Most of it is not, because it's produced by coal, it's produced by oil and gas. And we have no idea at the moment what to do with the batteries. So I think let the market decide and the research decide what's the cleanest way of mobility. And I think there, the hydrogen, for example, especially for the trucks you have your shoes from, might be the right solution.
Nice.
Yeah, very interesting point. And of course, hydrogen, very important for rail as well.
That's the Styrian delegation. I did my job now.
Check. No, and I think overall, it's a policy it's a policy responsibility. It's a policy responsibility to have a framework where you have your priorities, you have your backbone that you define, and then you need let the market provide services, and you need to be able to provide that framework, and that requires vision, right? Mm-hmm. That requires long-term vision from policymakers, and that's not always the priority, unfortunately, but that is what it requires. I mean, if we take the example of high-speed rail in France, for example, why is it there, and why is it now successful? Because of a vision that was there 20, 30, 40 years ago, and that's what now sets France apart in terms of the high-speed rail, and it significantly reduces for example, the domestic air travel. If you want to go from Paris to the south, you don't take a train, right?
True. But in France, the TGV, so the high-speed train, is very well developed. Yep. But the small lines, the local mobility, today is underdeveloped. So there is, as you said, there is always a benefit and another side of the coin. So look, yes, it's very easy to go from Paris to Lyon or from Paris to Marseille, but it's very difficult to go across France, and all the small lines are not well developed. So I think that, yes, multimodality And connecting all those dots and is the key.
Yeah.
Can I react quickly on what you've said very well? It's the role of policymakers, I think, is to fix the vision and the targets. I think that we need to be clear and to share targets. And our target is to diminish the pollution and the carbon emissions of our mobility in Europe by 90% by 2050. So in this we all agree. And then of course, yes, the technology is, especially for those areas where we don't know yet. I mean, for maritime, for aviation, there are many things that are being tried and they're not market ready. And we've also fixed targets for when do we want to have these things market ready. So we want the first carbon neutral vessels to be market ready by 2030, which is in 8 years. We want planes to be carbon neutral and be market ready. That will be a bit later, but I have already seen, last week I was in Miami and I met with a company that is actually already producing smaller planes that are already carbon neutral for six up to 8 people. So these things are being developed, and I think it's important to underline that our approach is technology neutral, but we are very serious about meeting these targets together.
Yeah, that's super interesting because on the one hand, Sam, you said that France had this 20-30-year vision. At the same time, you mentioned Ukraine at one point, and you're talking about the urgency. How do you balance the urgency of things we need to do right now from a climate perspective or from what's going on in Europe with the need to do it right, to do it so that it's sustainable, it helps people, and it helps the environment? How do you balance those two? You have 30 seconds.
Well, someone, I think a US politician was saying last week, what we're doing now with putting perhaps more oil and gas in the market in the short term, it's dealing with the fire in the kitchen. So we're dealing with the urgency, but without losing the long-term target of becoming carbon neutral. And if anything, what's happening in Ukraine, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, has waken us up to our dependency on fossil fuels, especially from Russia, and therefore increased our determination to be carbon neutral as soon as possible, and definitely by mid-century.
I think that that's where the startups and the scale-ups and the agility of young companies can bring a lot. Because public policy, big corporation, they need 10 years, 20 years ahead to plan, to think, to organize. Small company, we now, and when I talk small company, I'm more talking about like startup spirit, which here it sounds by very well represented. It's about agility. And agility is, we all know how to code on with a Scrum Master, we have sprints, we can provide new technology in 2 weeks. And in a world which is changing so fast, the only weapon we have is agility. So we need to be agile. And so I don't think that we can provide a policy that can balance emergency versus planning. The only weapon is agility.
I think if you discover any positive effects on the COVID crisis, it was a huge push on digitalization. And if you want to see any positive aspect on the Ukraine crisis at the moment, it's the push for really getting into this renewable energy sources much faster than we expected. As Austria, we are heavily dependent on the energy from the Ukraine and Russia. And I think with the Green Deal and the recovery package within the European Union, with additional billions for digitalization and additional billions for getting sustainable and carbon-free at certain point in time, I think this is the momentum we should use. And then the policy needs to have a framework where we can test as fast as possible new techniques and bring them into real production. And I think this is going to be the testing environment we need so far. On the short term, we need heavy compensation for the companies because the energy prices are getting up like hell. But in the midterm view, I think the research we are doing at the moment already has great potential.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that framework that you mentioned is really the requirement to have a long-term vision, which is defined by policy. And basically, within that framework, you give the right incentives also to startups that can be agile, that can work towards those long-term goals. And for me, the role of policy is to set the goals, to set the boundaries, to define that framework, and then give the right incentives here and there to be able to let startups, let agile organizations work towards the goals that you want. And that's of course a balance between long-term and solving short-term problems. But
Okay, well, let's go with that theme. Pretend it's 2100.
yeah.
What does a green mobility future look like? What is like the positive view?
Sure, I can take it.
You have the solution, part of the solution.
To be honest, for green mobility, our vision is that you need multiple layers, and what you need is multimodal solutions, right? So you need the layer which is the intercity layer, you need the international layer, and then if you talk about the urban situation, you need, again, and I'm going to knock on the same thing, you need your backbone. And basically, you need your backbone to be able to serve your city and to serve to connect your different nodes, and from those nodes you can then trickle further. And again, it's our vision that rail is the perfect backbone for cities. You come into your main station through an intercity connection. Within your city, you have your urban rail network, and then from your urban rail stops, then you can build your multimodal solution. What you want to avoid is, of course, we're in the US, but what you want to avoid is having to do all your intra-city movements with Uber. It's crazy. For me as a European, it's the first time I'm in the South. I've been in the north of the US. In the big cities, there's relatively okay public transport system. But in the South, this is really striking for me, that the basis of transportation in your city is the car. And if you don't have a car, you're nowhere.
It's America.
So, for me, innovation is about disruption. So, if there is one thing I don't know, is that what the transportation would look like in 100 years, I don't know. And we need to accept that we don't know. And it's good to be surprised by the future. We need to embrace the future and say, we don't know. But there is one thing I know, is when I'm in Paris, the thing I enjoy the most is I don't possess any means of transportation. I have someone to identify myself, and I can jump into a trottinette, then I take a scooter, then I take a cab, then I take the tube, then perhaps I take the plane, then perhaps I take an helicopter, then perhaps I take something new that hasn't been invented yet. So I think that how I envisage, how I dream about the future is a future where each technology is perfectly adapted to where I want to go. If I need to do 1 mile, it's a complete different technology that if I need to do a transatlantic trip or if I need to go to Mars or to the moon. But still, with one simple way to identify myself, I can take any of those transportation means. So multimodality, connectivity, and digitalization of those transportation means enable any one of those innovations to take his own place in this complex ecosystem.
I think Lionel has made a very important point. In the future, we're going to see mobility as a service, not as our car or our bicycle or
Exactly.
we might still own a bicycle, but most of the time we will be looking for a service from how to get from A to B. And as you said, it will be a combination of micro-mobility, where you can walk or do something in the first mile or two, and then you can jump on other modes of transport. And of course, planners like yourself need to make the environment so that that is possible. So that you have bicycle lanes, that you have bigger sidewalks where you can actually walk, that you have ideally interconnected services as well. So I remember very well, because my father was actually in public transport, where they were negotiating just to have one single mode of payment for all of the modes of transport in Madrid, which is where I grew up. That was a huge negotiation, but that can be done, you know, with the different stakeholders around the table, and it can be achieved. So I think those different layers, as you were saying before, are very important. Some of them are much more difficult than others, but I guess we're going to get to the challenges in a moment, because at the moment, as you were saying before, we're using 99% of fossil fuels for maritime aviation and the longer haul, and of course the big trucks. So those are the more difficult to decarbonize.
But I would even doubt if it's necessary in 100 years from now to really be, that it's necessary to be transported physically. I think Ferdinand Porsche, for example, over 100 years ago, he invented already the electric car. And now we think this is innovation. He's an Austrian, so this is why I know the example. But maybe in 100 years, with the technology, and they are working on it already, hyperclips or even beaming, maybe it's not even necessary to enter a car, a train. Maybe we fly, maybe we transform ourselves like the Matrix to somebody else. So yeah, it's hard, but for sure it's going to be disruptive. And for small economies like the Austrian ones, it's necessary to stay innovative, to have the skilled people that are able to understand what might come, and to be as fast as possible and be reactive on the developments.
Look, and if I can, you know, the most disruptive innovation about transportation is Zoom. I mean, we are how many, all of us, the thousands of Zoom meetings we all had, and that replaced an actual means of transportation. So we can say that Zoom is a means of transportation. It already exists, it does. Not exactly as Star Trek imagined it a few years ago. How was it? Carter's Beam Me or whatever. No, it's not exactly the same way, but Zoom is a means of transportation. So we need to embrace the future, and but the future might be already there. It's already here.
You know, I ordered my Porsche months ago, but it hasn't arrived. But for some reason.
Didn't work?
I don't know. It's
because we
somewhere
are so much dependent on China.
Yeah. So I think you've done a good job of saying, you know, what the future is going to bring, but what is our first step? Like, we walk out of here, and what's the first thing I should do? Should I sell my car? Should I not get a pickup truck? Should I just, like, what is the first thing I do? Do I just invest in Zoom? Like, what are the first things you would tell these people to do?
I think you look at what you do every day, how you move, and you start thinking how you can move differently, and what are the options. But of course, that's, as we were saying before, is only possible if you have those options around. So, and as citizens, of course, we can also campaign to get more options on the table and to get city politicians and state politicians, in our case, the European Union. And we heard that voice loud and clear 2 years ago during the European Parliament elections. People wanted a greener future and a greener mobility, so we're, you know, head on doing it.
I would say, as an advice, I mean, be early adopters, be innovative, be creative, try technology. Even if it's not the right one, the next one will be the right one. So we need to all be early adopters, because I think that's the way technology moves forward. And I lived in China. I think if we need to learn something out of China, is our entire 1.4 billion people are 1.4 early adopters. Look at how fast they went from cash to QR code payment. It's unbelievable, 1.4 billion people. So if we want to move forward with green mobility, we all need to be early adopters. The second thing is identity and payment, because if we want to be able to use different means of transportation, digital identity is the key, the central element. We need to be identified properly, securely, including data privacy and everything. But we need to be identified in order to be able to use mobility as a service. If you are not identified, so we say, okay, this is my own car, and this is that belongs to me, I am in my car, this is my property, I don't need to be identified. This is exactly the opposite of what we need to do. So embrace technology, embrace innovation, and to be able to be electronically identified. That's the way green mobility and future mobility will arrive.
For me, it's think. Think is the decision that I take something that makes sense. Do I take from Belgium to Austria if I go skiing? Do I take the plane? I know that snow is getting more and more. We know about global warming. It doesn't make sense to go skiing by taking the plane. Not at all. So that's my message. Let's start thinking about the choices that we make in terms of mobility.
For me, the most important thing is that everybody has the choice to decide what kind of mobility is necessary as individual and is necessary as company. And for the Austrian businesses, they need to stay competitive, and therefore it's the diversity in mobility we need.
So you heard it here. And what I want you all to do after this session is, 1, get politically active, so contact your politicians. 2, be early adopters.
Yeah.
3, think when next time you go skiing in Austria, or just think about your transportation mode, and then sort of really think about what the economic impacts are of green mobility going forward. So with that, I'm going to open it up. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the great talk. It's very inspiring. But I want to come back to the incentive, your first question, basically, why, when I click on Amazon, why should I think about that? For your shoes, nice shoes, by the way.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you have looked into another area, which is the insurance, because with increasing pollution, the health insurance will increase in price because they are not going to pay for the more illness that will spread. And same is true for car and house insurance. With increasing the climate change, with hurricanes, flooding, fire, I can imagine that the insurance price will skyrocket also, a bit like we see the energy price rocketing. So I was wondering if there is any discussion with the insurance company on that, to incentivize the citizen to think first. If there are models like every time I click, my insurance is growing $1 more, because I mean to have a clear image of the consequence of clicking and buying online. So I was wondering if there is any type of discussions ongoing. Thank you.
I can take a bit of that. I'm not aware of any direct link that is already existing, but I am aware of examples where insurance companies have been at the table to talk about adaptation and talk about, given the challenge and the consequences that are already there of climate change, how do we limit them and also make it's a good business case for insurance companies because then we'll have less claims and less expenses, of course, covering those claims. So I am aware of examples where insurers have been at the table to say, okay, we'll put some of the money needed for certain adaptation projects, for example, against sea level rise. I think it's one of the most prominent because sea level rise will cause a lot of houses at the sea to have less value or to be inundated. So there are schemes, and I think there's a lot that can be learned from those schemes where the insurers provide some of the money that is necessary for some of the adaptation projects, and against that they get some changes in the policies as well.
So about the insurance, when you think about insurance, at the beginning we talked about mutualizing a risk, how we mutualize a risk, and so we pay an insurance and we share the risk all together. And unfortunately now, with all the metadata created. We just evaluate the risk and we just pay for the risk. We don't mutualize anymore. So what you're saying is already here in our day-to-day life, and we pay insurance as a service, as mobility as a service, insurance as a service, as long as you can identify the risk and you can quantify the risk. I'm not sure this is a bright future, but unfortunately, this is the one we're in.
Great. Any other questions from the audience?
Great talk, by the way, everybody. I'm just curious, again, you know, as a native Texan, I know this, we are far behind Europe in terms of every single thing that you guys are talking about, right? I guess my question is, you know, in the US it works better to have people embrace something than to mandate something, right? So how do we get the message out that this is the best way to go? Because I live in Houston, for example, it's super hot often, and my girlfriend doesn't want to walk, you know, a half a mile to the bar. She'd rather take an Uber, which is insane. So, you know, how do we massage the message or portray the message that makes people want to do it, as opposed to, you know, having to do it? Because I think in cities like Austin, it's great. They've got the scooters, they've got the tram, they've got all kinds of things. But cities like Houston, cities like Los Angeles, we're more car-centric. Everything is spread out, et cetera. So, I mean, I don't know if y'all have any thoughts on the best way to message it to the public to get them to embrace it.
Come and try it. Come and try. I mean, that's the best message. It's you know, I live in Houston since September, and I turned myself into an Uber dad. So all thing I do, because of the lack of public transportation, the only thing I do every single day is driving my kids from home to school, from school to sport, from sport to piano. I'm getting nuts and crazy. And I say, can I take an Uber? I say, no, they are not, they are under 18, it's impossible. I say, oh, under 18 cannot take an Uber? No. And a cab? No. So what can you do? Drive your kids. I don't think it's really good for the development of the city. And so public transportation is the answer, and mobility as a service is the answer. And there are a lot of European cities where it's already there. Come and try.
And I think demonstration projects, are very powerful sometimes. I mean, you start small, as I was saying, with the bus in Dunkirk over the weekend, and then that works, and then people ask for more. So during COVID, for example, a lot of European cities started putting more bicycle lanes because the cars were not there. So it was still a bit controversial in some places, but now that people are back to work, some of them are taking more the bikes or the trottinette, you know, the scooters to go to work rather than always having to take the car. And people like to have options. So I think it's start something and see if it's successful, and then you build up from there.
I think one of the answers is it needs to be convenient. So mobility as a service, and there public transport is one of the answers. And on the other hand, I think it all depends on education. To educate the people what their behavior means in the future. And no matter if you're doing it in schools, in kindergarten, or in Austria with the vocational training, you need to make especially the young able to understand what are the options and what this might mean in 20 to 15 years. And as we all become older, this is even more crucial.
So I'd like to add that in Austin, we get an average of 150 people move to Austin every day. So just in the time that we started talking here, I think 15 people just showed up. But I think that also sort of elevates an opportunity, right? Because as we grow quickly, how do we make the right decisions now to provide those choices, as you mentioned, later on, and have that vision going forward? And sort of making those decisions now quickly so that we can adapt going forward. There's a question up here.
Yeah, hello. I'm Jonathan from Green Drive, founder and CEO. come from Austria. Right now it's a carpooling app that includes public transportation. So in future we are working on giving people the best choices. So what I believe mobility as a service, it shouldn't be, we have to make it easy for people to make the right choices, to recommend the right choices, to gather this data that you talked about. So we're working on that. It will soon be available. I believe it should work like you use a sky scanner to find a flight. You just get the best options, the best connections, the best price, the best for your health maybe, and we will learn about your mobility needs and recommend you the best choices and options. So I guess that's the future to go.
Great. Thank you.
That's not a question.
Are there other questions from the audience? So while we wait for the next question, I do want to touch on something, though, is, we tend to think of Europe as being this wonderful place for transportation. Like you can walk everywhere, and like you have cafes everywhere and all that. But at the same time, those were designed before cars were even invented, right? They were designed at a time when people walked everywhere, maybe had a horse. Now, as things shift, how do you rethink a European city with new technologies and new sort of innovations to try to cram that into an existing structure that's hard to change? Is there, what's the future of European cities when it comes to transportation?
I think that's an interesting point, because you say that cars were being, or cities were being designed before cars were there. Then let's say 60 or 70 years ago we had the shift to cars. Then we had cars all over the place until 10 years ago. And now what you see is actually shift back. So what's important is that you give the cities and you give the urban areas to the people. And that's I think where indeed mobility as a service, where the different transport modes come into play, because you don't want your city to be full of parking lots. You don't want your city to be full of traffic jams. That's not what they're designed for. So actually the shift is already happening. It's happening in a lot of cities already in Europe. And I think that's the way forward. We don't want, actually it's going back to what it's designed for in a very sustainable way. Yeah.
I think there the answer is as well diversity. I think in at least in Vienna and in other cities in Europe as well, they tried to get the cars out of the city again. They tried to diverse with bicycles, and like in Austin with these e-scooters, they are floating at the moment all over. And I think it's underground. It's good underground system. Not easy, especially in Vienna with all the historic buildings. But this is life quality as well, to give the people the diversity to clean the air, basically.
Yeah. It doesn't need to be underground. It can be above ground.
Yeah, all levels, in the air, under the ground.
But you need to have that backbone, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Have that framework, and then build your multimodal network.
And I think that now in Europe, there are some cities that are trying something, and I feel very interesting. It goes against my interest, but still, I think it's very interesting, is having public transportation for free. Mm-hmm. What if you get into Paris and you can take any means of transportation, everything's for free? Are you still gonna buy a car? No. So I think that part of the public policy and how you pay for your public transportation, how much does that cost you? And if you now take all the negative externalities of having a car or paying, in reality, perhaps, and some cities are trying, and if you think about blockchain technology in order to perhaps having all those different means of transportation connecting it one with the other and sharing one price to be defined. But perhaps the future is just that moving from point A to point B is part of my rights as a human being, and perhaps it's for free. And perhaps that's the future. And if I have to dream about a future, I can take a plane for free. I can take a tube for free. I can take a trottinette for free. That's a lovely future, isn't it?
Or perhaps you will pay a premium if you want to take that carbon-free plane that takes you from A to B in 5 minutes or 10 minutes as opposed to half an hour by tube.
Or the other way around.
Yeah.
Carbon-free is free, and the one that is not carbon-free is very expensive.
Exactly. That's a good plan.
So we have 8 more minutes. Are there any? There's a question over here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Precious Fatimirae. I'm a computer science graduating senior undergrad. My question is for y'all, how do you implement alternative mobility solutions for more rural and suburban areas? I'm also from Houston, so not necessarily super packed in the city, but we have a lot of specific suburbs around where we have city centers and stores and shops and businesses built around the suburbs to where it's very close to being a small town, but people still drive 5 minutes, 7 minutes to get to, the ice cream store or like the mall really nearby. So how do you implement that in more suburban areas rather than like a dense city like Austin?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question because, of course, we've been talking a lot about cities, but we also need to bring people into cities in a way that doesn't make them more, that doesn't create more congestion. Some of it will be having a very good infrastructure for electric vehicles so that people don't have range anxiety and they know that they can recharge their cars and also charge their cars in a parking, leaving the car outside the city. I think that's a good solution that is also being tried in many places in Europe. And some of it will be pooling resources, especially in cities that have other smaller cities around, which is the case, I think, in many places, the metro areas, what we know as the metro areas, pooling resources so that the mobility of the entire area improves. And that there's very good models out there. I'm going to be in Kansas City next month, where there's going to be a big summit of smaller cities looking together at how to work together. And that model is very promising as well.
And have you heard about a company called BlaBlaCar? Is a way just to share, how many people are driving their car alone in those suburb areas is just you can just publish very easily in a website. I'm going to go every day from my house, my neighborhood to the train station, and you can just share that. So they are very interesting experience, and BlaBlaCar is one of them. I know there are many others that are very interested. I think that one of the solutions is sharing.
So how do you get more trains in rural populations?
That's a very good question, because of course a train requires some distance, right? You need to be able to cover a bit of distance for it to be efficient. What we're seeing in Europe is that these smaller, more rural areas, they're very often disconnected from what we see as the main lines. And what we see there is really autonomous solutions. So what you put in place is autonomous shuttles, and it can be on rail, it can be on tracks, it can be on designated roads, where you basically have a very efficient, low-cost, fast way of getting from A to B and getting to that next transport node, which allows you to go to the city. Because that's the problem, right? You need to connect your nodes. So you take, maybe you walk, you take the electric bike to the first node, which is then a shuttle that goes to the next node, which is a bigger one. So we really think that autonomous solutions are perfect for solving these. It's basically low density, where you need efficiency, where you need flexibility, where you need speed. That's where autonomous solutions are perfect for. So, yeah.
Thank you. There's a question up front. This might be the last question.
Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Food Notify, and as the name of the company says, 1/4 of the climate change is food, of course, that we know. So my question to the panel is, how do you cope with that in your daily life? Do you think about that? Do you compare the foods, the packaging, and the stuff?
So at the Office of Sustainability, we focus on two topics. It's climate, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and preparing for climate change. And then we have a whole team looking at the food system and food policy and how do we ensure that people have equal access to fresh, healthy food. So it's part of our constant conversation. But you're absolutely right. A lot of it comes down to access, right? So transportation access, physical access to these communities. And that sort of gets to a little bit to the rural question, but also the initial question about equity. How do we ensure that the transportation system allows people to have access to these needed resources, be it health centers, healthy, fresh foods, but at the same time, how do you ensure that these transportation systems are not getting people in harm's way to climate change, more flooding, wildfire, heat, et cetera? What's the perfect scenario where ensure that people have access to these things?
I don't know if there is a perfect system, but what I know, we work with FAMOCO, we work a lot in Africa with refugees and with the World Food Program. And a few years ago, the World Food Program, where they had to help an area, they were bringing a lot of food. So they were bringing rice. They were bringing a lot of food in a needed area. What happened where they've done that is that they were killing completely the local economy. So after that, there is no local economy. So I think part of the solution and the lesson learned is, so what they do now is they're sending money to help the local economy to grow. And the only solution is helping the local economy. We need to stop buying things that are coming from hundreds of miles away. And I mean, the circuit court, I don't know how you say that in English, I mean, local economy is the only way to go for me. And
you're right that the food is a huge part of our pollution, the way we influence the climate, and it's not the one that we think about more often. At European level, in this cycle of policy, we've very much tackled it through the policy that we call farm to fork, so trying to incentivize that, and there's many layers of it which I don't have the time to explain. At a personal level, I think a lot about packaging of food as well, which I think, I mean, plastic pollution is something we haven't entered it today but it's a huge thing. And during the pandemic, we kept cooking at home, basically, because for me, like ordering food always meant, what do I do with the packaging? And I know only 10% of what I'm supposed, I always recycle, but I know even 10% of what I'll put in the recycling box will really be recycled. So I think that's a huge issue that the food industry also needs to tackle. I think by next year or the year after, in Spain at least, all the packaging for food, the food that you find in supermarkets will already be sustainable and plastic will be forbidden. But of course, that's a huge transformation for all the food companies, for transportation companies, because you use the packaging to protect the food while it's being transported. So I think, yeah, there's many ways in which we need to think about how we behave as individuals.
So, well, I want to thank the panel for taking the time to meet here today and for the great conversation. So. And the one thing I really sort of was inspired by was what you said about like that transportation should be a right. So let's go out there, talk to our politicians, make the right choices, and don't fly to Austria for skiing. Sorry.
All right.
Sorry. Take a train there.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Mark, for chairing this panel. One more round of applause for the panelists here. At this moment, we invite you guys to continue to hang out in the bar. You're welcome to grab a drink. We're actually going to be flipping this room over in about 20 minutes for another panel on technology and national security starting at 2:30. You're more than welcome just to hang out. Otherwise, feel free to pop outside for a drink, maybe a snack, or actually to catch a sneak peek of the music that we'll be having tonight, which is running through a sound check right now. There is also a donation drive to support a Ukrainian resistance